This video is for AQA A-Level Economics Paper 3, which is the synoptic paper. And we're going to be focusing on the June 2023 and the 25 market. It's going to provide tips and techniques to how to, tackle such a question. This is going to be the largest marked question on the paper, and it's going to be the final question that you complete. So in June 2023, this was the question. It was asking you to consider extracts D and the original evidence in A, B and C, and would you recommend that the government of Sri Lanka cuts its spending to reduce its debt? So when you come into this summer exam and you look at that paper 3 and you get to that 25 marker, the most important thing you need to consider is what structure does the examiner expect? If you get the structure right, that's going to help your essay flow, but it's going to tackle the key issues. And you have to remember, the examiner creates the case studies and the extracts, they create the questions, but more importantly, they create the mark scheme. So you need to kind of anticipate, when looking at those extracts, what arguments is the examiner expecting and what structure should you be tackling in terms of those arguments. So clearly the government, one argument is they should cut spending, because that's the key aspect of this question. But then you need an opposing argument, which is actually no, the government should remain in terms of their current expenditure. Or what's the alternative? Now, in the case studies, in the extracts, it will provide clues and information on all of those three. So it'll give you information as to why the government should cut spending, why the government shouldn't, and it'll even give you ideas as to what the alternatives are. Now, if you start just introducing your own points, then the dangers of that is you're not responding to the data, and therefore you might not be tackling the key issues which are going to be addressed in the mark scheme. So once you've understood what the structure is, consider how you're going to introduce your essay. I would always do it with a quick understanding of what the key concept or the key theoretical point of the question is, which is, to me, national debt. So I'm going to define national debt, and I'm going to say it's the accumulation of government borrowing over time via budget deficits. It represents the total amount of money that a government owes to creditors, both domestic and foreign. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to return to extracts A, B, C and D, and I'm going to find the evidence and the clues in the case study. Because remember, this is data response, so you have to respond to the data. And this paper 3 gives you the largest case study with the most amount of extracts, and there is so many clues in there. So let's focus on, yes, the government should cut spending. And the first piece of evidence that I found is this one. So much of the debt is in the foreign currency. The Sri Lankan rupee depreciated by 6.8% against the US dollar between January and September 2021, and some fear that Sri Lanka could go bankrupt as the country struggles to repay such overseas debt. So that's my evidence. But what I need to do, and this is really important, is data response, respond to the data, but do not regurgitate the data. So what you shouldn't be doing is just using the clues from the case study and just allowing that to take over. That should drive your theoretical arguments. So I'm going to bring in theoretical arguments such as, well, that creates an opportunity cost. So the opportunity cost of interest and exchange rate changes is going to obviously mean that it's going to create greater trade-offs in the future if I don't address this national debt now. And therefore, one way of doing that is cutting government spending. So yes, they should. I'm going to tackle maybe the confidence that this could obviously harm, how it could impact the credit rating of Sri Lanka, making it more expensive to borrow in the future. And I'm going to address bond coupons and yields. And I'm going to talk about, if it does knock on that confidence, then could that lead to capital flight as well? So make sure that you derive your theoretical analytical arguments from the case study, but do not just simply regurgitate what the case study says. And then I could even tackle intergenerational equity. So is it fair for future generations to pay the price of excessive government spending in today? Another piece of evidence for yes, the government should cut spending is this one. So this was just part of the extract which you use to tackle the 10 marker, but that data is just as important. Do not neglect any information that you've used in previous questions thinking, oh, well, I'm done with that data now, because it might still be needed in the 25 marker. So Labour participation is 53.9%. That was lower than the other countries of comparison, such as Pakistan and Bangladesh. So that's a problem. That's a problem for the Sri Lankan economy. For number one, the dependency ratio is going to be quite high. Think about all that lost tax revenue that they could be earning from people participating in the workforce. Think about, again, national productivity, which could help to bring in more tax revenue. And think about the government expenditure on those who are not working. So is welfare too generous? It actually mentions welfare in the case study in one of the other extracts, so you could refer to that. So could the government cut spending to help increase labour participation and therefore reduce the dependency ratio, increasing tax revenue, cutting government expenditure, reducing that budget deficit, and therefore paying off their national debt? Now, the other argument is actually government spending should remain. And again, there's clues and evidence in the case study to suggest that maybe they should continue to increase their spending. And one reason is the pandemic. So this case study was following on the pandemic, which has hit Sri Lanka hard, especially the tourist industry, which contributes more than 10% towards GDP. So, if we look at it from that point of view, what we could do is we consider, all right, is this a cyclical budget deficit? Does the economy need to recover? And then once that recovers, or that recovery takes place, then government expenditure will automatically fall and tax revenue will automatically increase, and talk about automatic stabilisers. You've also got government spending can help to promote economic development, providing merit in public goods and supporting people on very low incomes. So when we're thinking about the provision of merit goods, we could maybe address the HDI in terms of the previous extract and look at actually that healthcare provision, that education provision, how important has it been for Sri Lanka? And we can again use those comparisons that we did with the 10 marker with Pakistan and Bangladesh to support the justification as to why that spending should remain and it shouldn't be cut. Again, it mentions about providing essential infrastructure and talks about public goods. It mentions welfare expenditure and the safety net programme to help the most vulnerable. So this is what the government spending is currently going on. And again, you could use that to analyse as to whether that really should be cut, or is it really, really important in terms of their macroeconomic objective of economic development. So what the theoretical arguments I'd be making is it a cyclical budget deficit? Is it spending to support the recovery? Is it the crowding effect taking place? Is it going to spot growth, increase tax receipts and help to reduce the debt to GDP ratio? And therefore, once the economy bounces back, this shouldn't be a problem. And that economic development is actually improving the trend rate of growth in Sri Lanka. I could use the data, so HDI, 0.782, life expectancy, 77 years, adult literacy, 91.7. The government expenditure is working. Is helping the economic development, is giving them that competitive advantage over similar countries. And then I can look at the alternatives. So what clues in terms of the alternatives? This is probably going to be harder to find, but it is in there. And straight away, looking at the data, the Gini index, 39.3, which was actually lower compared to Bangladesh and Pakistan. Sorry, when I say lower, I mean they've got greater inequality. The poorest 40% of the population is 17.7%. So what you could do is you could say, actually, what the Sri Lankan government could do is they could tackle national debt, but they could do it in a progressive way. So they could introduce a more progressive tax system, which could then help that redistribution of income, but also support increase in tax revenue, which then could also go towards paying off national debt. So if they target direct tax, support distribution of income, as well as raise tax revenue, it might do what that question is also asking. So these were the common mistakes that I found. Some students failed to respond to the data when selecting alternatives. So examples such as indirect tax failed to acknowledge the given the situation of Sri Lanka and therefore wasn't really relevant and wasn't really referred to in the mark scheme. Students who acknowledged the recovery of Sri Lanka were more equipped to evaluate whether it's the right time to cut government expenditure, but if you didn't acknowledge it, then that was a common mistake in terms of not really tackling the contextual situation of Sri Lanka at that time. So this is an exemplar answer, and what I recommend is maybe just pausing, reading this first issue, and then I'll go on to my other issues as well. This is my evaluation argument, so remember, try to evaluate throughout. That doesn't mean just simply a counter argument, but think about your use of evaluative language. My second argument as to whether actually maybe the government spending is warranted. Again, feel free to pause. My evaluation leading into my issue 3, which is my alternative. And my overall judgment.